We're happy to have our colleague Bob Hall speak. I just wrote a few things down. He's been at Hoover since 1978. Sorry to say that.
It's been good for
But
me.
he before that he taught at MIT, Berkeley, and believe it or not, he was born here in Palo Alto. I don't know too many can say that. That's terrific. President of the American Economic Association, author, where's Elvis? Elvis not here, the flat tax. And of course, his 1985 book on macroeconomics with this guy named Taylor. But today, a very good title. Maybe this is the longest title I've heard. A major shock makes prices more flexible and may result in a burst of inflation or deflation. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks. It's nice to be here. Oh, I'm going to try to do this standing. Am I getting any amplification on, or do I need it?
You can sit down.
Okay, well, I like to stand.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, let's see what happens.
Probably needed. It's hard to hear.
We'll see. Okay, so self-explanatory title. This works its way through three propositions, and there'll be a proposition slide for each of the three. But I'll just so you see, this is the only introduction you're going to get. Costs large increases in price flexibility in the presence of menu cost price stickiness. So this is going to be an exercise in a topic that I stayed away from in 55 years of my career until this year. But I never said it was wrong. I just said I wasn't interested in it. And then suddenly I got interested. Then moving on, the volatility of cost shocks rises in crises, such as the financial crisis and the pandemic. And then finally, episodes of runaway inflation or deflation may, not necessarily, and this is going to be very important point, may have, there may be bursts of inflation or deflation when prices become wide, a large fraction of prices become flexible because they're outside the zone of inaction, and so it's a pretty obvious proposition. And of course, I'm just waiting. Ken and I were chatting about this before. There may be part of the analysis in the first section that has been done before in some part of the huge literature on SS models, which this is a contribution to. But I haven't seen it, at least in the Calvo type literature, where the object of interest is a price that's set. So, but stand by on that. I could easily imagine sometime in the next 6 weeks that I'll get an email with a site that says this has all been done before.
Bob, only cost shocks? I mean, intuitively, one would think that a big demand shock would lead to more flexible prices too, as happens in Argentina.
Stand by.
Okay.
Answer no, but there are other sources of shocks. In fact, I'll document other shocks. So you're half right and half wrong, as you'll see. Okay, so this is a contribution to the branch of the sticky price literature that's associated with a very well-known paper by Golisov and Lucas, and a lot of what I do is tied to the same setup as in their paper, simplification of it, but the same basic idea. But the goal, the aspect of the behavior that is identified in that paper is quite different in the take that I have compared to what Golisov and Lucas do. So the key thing is that this belongs to the broad class of SS models, where there is a cost of action which generates, in terms of behavior, a zone of inaction where the agents are A, because it incurs a setup cost, a menu cost, as it's called in this literature, and that's central. When they engage in what's called a reset, it means that they have cleared it is now worthwhile to take an action rather than just sticking where you were before. So there's a contrast here between the two actions. One is stick, and the other is reset. And then the question is, what interesting things can we say? And focusing entirely on this question of whether you can get a big enough change in the regions relevant in that literature to get big differences in crises than in normal times. So this is a crisis is something like the most recently, of course, it's the pandemic, and before that, in both you'll see both the pandemic and the financial crisis have big changes in the determinants of the zone of inaction. Give a much higher probability of the price winding up out of the zone of inaction, that is getting a reset, and a reset then eliminates price stickiness. So this is a theory that in crises, Keynesian economics becomes irrelevant in crises because there's no price stickiness left. That's the one simple way of explaining what's the idea. I've only located one paper, but there is one paper by Joe Bavra about 10 years ago that sort of mentions this on the fly, but it's become, in my development here, it's this kind of the centerpiece. Okay, so
the slide said it's a fixed markup over cost. Cost at the time you reset, or expected cost, or what? What's the cost concept?
okay, it's optimal in this class of models to make an adjustment that is effect whose amount can be deduced without having to look into the future.
Right.
In spite of it's because you know that you'll make the same decision in the future as currently. So the technology here is Dixit, Spence, Stiglitz, and so you get a markup in cost. Cost changes, price needs to change when cost changes. And getting back to what John mentioned, that technology or that setup, that market setup, is one in which there's no response to a change in demand. The cost is the pure determinant, cost and productivity, and market power. There are three sources of volatility, but demand is not one of them. So price is not affected by demand. That's a fundamental principle of the Dixit Stiglitz.
Well, that's just because they don't have a fixed input like capital in their model.
Yeah. Oh, agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is real stripped down.
Yeah.
Sure. But I think you can see your way to complicate it in the world by bringing in capital, and then of course.
If you know costs are going up in the future, you don't raise prices more now because they're going to be stuck there for a while?
No, not in this setup. Well, no, I'm sorry. What you know what the future is going to look like, and you know that the price you're setting now may apply in the future. But in the future, you would want to choose the same price as today, so you can infer the price without having to do what looks superficially in some branches of this literature, like which maps in all these expectations. This is doing new Keynesian models in which expectations have no real important role, which is something that I've always craved. I always thought that it's fundamentally confusing in the way that new Keynesian literature is usually written up, that all that matters is expectations of the future. But that's not. It turns out not to be true in this setup. It took me a while to figure that out. Okay, so I've discussed most of the features of this model. There's a simple technology. 1 unit of input makes 1 unit of output. I'll mention a little bit later changes in productivity, which then introduce another source of volatility. So this is stage 1, and those are stage 2, where market power, which I ignore at this stage, comes into the story too. Okay, so the firm. So we're going to describe the world as seen by one firm. But the economy has many firms, and certainly in any reasonable application of this, those firms are heterogeneous. Some are chronically in their in sticky price range, and some are chronically flexible price, and then others, which are the interesting ones, will go from one to the other depending on the volatility of cost. So that's where this is headed. Okay, so there's a random variable in each firm, which is its input cost in this first exercise, which is a random variable, and I'll tell you its distribution shortly. The elasticity, the price elasticity of demand is 2. Now, why is it 2? Yeah. I don't know. Has anyone else ever found this? 2 is just a uniquely convenient. It makes everything about the SS model just completely transparent, and it involves almost no math. It gets rid of almost all the math. All you have to know is the quadratic equation, which I think most of us can remember. We can always look it up on Wikipedia, but that's the only math you need to know to follow this, because of having a price elasticity of demand of 2. Okay, so that means that the demand function is 1 over p squared. It means that the markup ratio is 2, so that when the reset occurs, the reset will be to 2 times cost. So you get this, in this rather extreme market power, you sell the product for twice its marginal cost.
Is this a 1-period model, or are you anticipating prices might change again?
Well, it's cost that you need to restate that. Well, if cost changes again, you're going to get you're not going to use this price.
But I'm wondering, in a multi-period model, whether you go all the way to the current optimum, or
yes,
whether
you do.
You would.
Yes.
Yes. When free of menu costs.
This is the.
Yes.
0 menu costs.
0 menu cost. Okay.
Well, okay. Anyway, there's no the only optimization that the firm does, is called upon to do, is the one to figure out the markup, the 100% markup, double cost. So, I mean, this is all me trying to really simplify this problem. I think it makes it quite obvious what's going on. So, in practice, obviously, there's all kinds of reasons that the future might matter would come in, but this particular specification gets rid of it. And okay, so then there's a cost kappa to make a price change. and therefore, so the profit function is 2C minus C. That's price minus cost divided by the quantity, which is 2C squared. So that's the gross profit, but then you have to net out the cost of making that change, which is kappa. And then the question for the firm is, how does that compare to, so first of all, that simplifies to 1/4C minus kappa.
But Bob, here you just assumed that the price is going to be 2C as opposed to deriving that the price is going to be 2C.
Yeah.
So given that
So
there's a cost
I
to
told you the demand function. So there's optimizing against the constant elastic demand function standard.
Yeah, but now I have an intertemporal problem that I can either use the old price or I can use the new price. And if I set the new price, then that's a constraint on tomorrow's prices. So how did
Well, it's not no, but the problem you might be solving next period has the same solution. So,
what is the state variable of what was yesterday's price in it?
okay, yeah, there's this, you'll see how this evolves. You're in firm territory now.
Can I ask? I think I have a similar doubt. So what's the process for C?
I'll tell you that slide coming up.
That was my question.
All right, if Darrell's confused, then I don't feel
No, I'm not
bad.
confused. You're not addressing that dynamic of partial adjustment yet.
Well, okay, so I spent a lot of time thinking that I needed to introduce an assumption of that there were intertemporal issues that should come in, but because there was 100% discounting. But then it turned out that it wasn't right. Anyway, if I'm wrong on this, someone's going to have to straighten it out.
Well, price is a state variable when there's menu costs, right? I mean, that's kind of the point
Yes,
we're making.
yes, absolutely.
It is a state variable.
Yeah, I'll show you. Yeah. There's the law of motion. It's coming up.
So your firms don't intertemporally optimize. You just said something about 100% discounting.
No, that's what I thought. Then I realized that when they re-optimize, they do exactly the same thing that they would have done. This is, of course, leaning very hard on the special feature of Dixit-Stiglitz.
So that's an exercise for the interested reader to go prove for ourselves that you don't think about the fact that when you set a price today, you're changing a state variable for tomorrow's price changing decision.
Yeah, it doesn't show up in the. Okay, well, I spent a lot of time working on this, and I finally talked myself into this position. But for a long time, I was just saying, I'm assuming that the firm has 100% discount rate. Agree then that
I'm with you then.
Okay, fine. So that may recur. It would be fine if it recurs because I don't. This is just trying to make it clear. You know, when I started this project, I thought, well, it's sort of obvious that if there's more dispersion of costs, that there's going to be more firms outside and I don't need to say more than that. But then I got pressure from audiences. We want more of a story. So
I'm not being critical. I would like to learn how to use this model, and that seemed like the first thing the referees are going to ask me is, why do we go right?
Believe me, this paper will not be published, and this issue is completely resolved.
Also, the cost process, I was thinking, you maybe have some persistence to it.
Oh, okay.
In which case,
I thought about that too. Okay, there's no persistence.
Yeah.
What I'm going to talk about is explicit. If there's persistence, you get the corresponding law of motion.
Yeah.
But we're not going to get into that territory. This persistence is assumed away, and I don't think that is really much of a problem. Okay, so then on the other hand, if you don't re-optimize, so you're exploring what would happen if you stuck with what you inherited, then that's just the product. So today's cost and the price that you've elected to retain. And that generates a profit of P tilde minus C, or P tilde squared. And then we're looking to designate the zone of inaction. So the boundary of the zone of inaction is the point where the two profits are identical. And that's this equation. And here's the magic. That's a quadratic equation if the demand function has elasticity of 2. Otherwise, and that's key, because you want the upper end and the lower end. Sorry, the lower end and the upper end of the zone of inaction suggest that there should be 2 roots.
Yeah.
You get that automatically from the quadratic. Otherwise, you have to do some more math. So it's wanting to keep this really streamlined. I am satisfied that though the conclusions that we get to, which are quite surprising, apply. They're not unique to elasticity of 2. They would retain the simplicity of the constant elasticity demand, which a lot of us lean on very hard. But we have to conclude. Okay. All right, so I've said that. All right, so I hope you can see this. Anyway, it's customary in this literature to assume that kappa is a pretty small number, because if you're making a big deal out of a huge number, then it just can't be that it's that expensive to change the price. So it should take a small number that's representative of this literature, and then there's the zone of inaction, and of course it's indexed by the lagged price, as somebody mentioned, and there's 2 roots, and they correspond to the block boundaries of that zone. So that means that if you look at the choice problem, then the price is a function of cost. Then you get this this configuration.
Do these 2 graphs come from your equations? Can you get these 2 graphs from the equations?
Sure. Go straight away.
Show us.
Oh, well, I showed you a quadratic equation, and
Yeah.
I guess I assumed that you remembered minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
Get a kink in the middle. Where's the kink come from?
Oh, the kink is because you're not changing. You're taking advantage of. What am I?
Yeah, the zone of inaction is this interval pinned down by the 2 solutions to the quadratic.
Yeah.
So that's why the price decision doesn't depend on the cost. And then outside that is then when the markup.
Yes, that's right. The vertical axis was price on that diagram. So the whole rest of the paper is going to look at how this model works. Now we come up to the question of the cost shock, and the cost is drawn from a uniform distribution on an interval whose boundary is a parameter. So when that parameter delta is small, it means that there's a very broad support, and if delta is close to 1, then it's very narrow. So it's a measure of the dispersion, and it's the mean of the cost shock is always 0. Sorry, it's always 1. So delta, there's exactly the same amount of probability above as below. So obviously mean is 1. So it's a mean preserving spread. Okay, then that's the quadratic. Now restated in terms of the state variable PT minus 1. So you can see exactly how the lag price. So if you're on the left side, that's the reset side. Then you reset the price, and if you're on the right side of that, it's better not to. All right, so you can write this down as a time series process, and this is the part where I'm way in over my head, but you can see that this is a highly nonlinear first order difference equation. And there is an important question of whether or not the result of that is ergodic. In other words, is it sort of self-replicating? If you, in particular, the definition is the mean of the process the same over different intervals that you've taken it. So, for example, a non-ergodic process, a random walk is non-ergodic because it has a random variable concealed within it, where the random walk started that varies over time. From what I've dipped into in the math of this, there's not a lot of math that tells you, that answers this question directly if you give it a first period, first order difference equation in this form. So I turned to just doing this mathematically, and it's extremely cheap to do a lot of math with this difference equation because it has, especially because in the elasticity of the demand elasticity of 2, it's a trivial piece of math, so you can do a huge amount of Monte Carlo. John?
Yeah, I'm still kind of a little stuck on the dynamics. So I understand that these cost shocks are IID. So start at 1 and it's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. Now I get a cost shock out at 1.3. And I'm thinking, do I want to raise my price to 1.3? The fact that I know that next day's cost shock is not going to be centered at 1.3, it's going to be centered around 1 again, would seem to make a big difference on why don't I just leave the price alone at 1? Because tomorrow, I'm going to be IID around 1 again, not IID around 1.3. If I raise my price to 1.3, I'm pretty darn sure that I'm going to have to change it again tomorrow.
I think you got to stick with 100% discounting.
Yeah, that's right.
I
random walk
wavered on that,
shocks.
but okay, all right. Anyway,
Yeah, because you agree, if it's 100% discounting, then
It doesn't matter.
this is all fine.
yeah, okay. Well, Stan, okay, that's fine because I was perfectly satisfied with that until I had convinced myself that I didn't need to make that assumption.
Are the cost shocks going to be random walks or are they going to be IID?
They're IID.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if
That's
I see a
fine.
big cost shock, I kind of know that tomorrow I'm drawing from not this cost, I'm drawing from that cost over there. So I would
But you
really,
don't care about tomorrow if there's 100%.
unless
discounting.
100% discounting,
Yes.
I'm going to want to just leave the price alone because I know we're going right back tomorrow.
No, the counter argument is that the decision you make in that setting, in terms of setting a price, is the same.
It follows the
I'm
same
screwing myself
decision
the next day.
rule,
What's your condition on your
but
current
the
price?
state is different.
Okay.
So
All
no,
right,
this is
okay. Don't beat
recursive.
me up too much on this.
This is a recursive optimal control problem, recursive dynamic programming problem.
Yes, I agree with that.
And if you have sufficient mixing, then it's going to be ergodic. You don't have any explosion stuff going on here like a random walk, but because everything's bounded.
So you know theorems that would apply?
Basically, it's if you have a Markov process such that there's a positive probability of state I visiting state J, then you have an ergodic distribution. It's only if you have like islands of states that just once you're there, you stay there, that then you don't have ergodic stuff.
Okay. Well, But you do have that, so
No, you,
a picture.
yeah,
of
if your delta is big enough relative to the kappa, then it's gonna get mixed around. Because with a delta big enough, no matter where you are, you're gonna get kicked that you're gonna change it.
well, somewhere there's a picture. Yeah, I guess it's after.
Whereas like if delta is 0, basically there is no shock, and basically you just stay wherever you started. Now that process is not ergodic.
Okay, well, we could, but
So it's if you make delta big enough that it kicks things around enough, then it's going to behave nicely.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. So here, this is how this process evolves.
Yeah.
This is an experiment with a huge number of observations. It's 300. Anyway, it's a lot. I forget. Anyway, it's an infinite amount of arithmetic. You can see, just barely see that there's a little bit of effect. I'd have to, instead of having a million, if I did it 100 million times, which I could easily do, it would be even smoother. But I think you can see the point that, and this is, so this is the relation between the shock size, which is controlled on the horizontal axis by the parameter delta, and then for each of the million observation vectors that it's generated, it computes what fraction of those observations involved a reset. So this is the reset fraction. So on the left, there isn't enough stirring up, just what Ken was talking about. It's not being stirred up enough so that you just always stick. And that's the end of the story. And this is what's crucial, is that then at a particular level, which is a little below, you can see it's a little below 0.09, then you get this seemingly discontinuous, but it's actually not discontinuous. It doesn't really matter, but the conclusion would be the same, but I explored that pretty carefully. But there's a key value just under 0.09, where you're suddenly getting resets, a substantial volume of resets. And if you go up, say, to a delta of 0.25, then you get 70% of the time you're resetting the price. So you get, and the relationship is that you snap upward to about 30% resets when you cross this, very soon after you cross this key point, which is about 0.09. So it's wonderfully nonlinear, and that's exactly what we're looking for here. So firms that start out in normal times, just to the left of that. Let's see.
So what are you simulating to get this? You're thousands of simulate. What do you calculate?
I'm just running. It's a first order difference equation, highly nonlinear.
Of the ones that you showed us.
So you have so you're generating a time series just by iterating this. Here, it's a first order difference equation, and you're generating.
You had that on the before previous slides.
Yeah, PT is equal to f of PT minus 1, and then current cost.
So that difference equation, PT, depending on PT minus 1.
And then cost is an IID shock.
Yeah.
Yes.
Drug costs,
Yeah.
and then also forward.
Yeah. Is that clear now?
Well, what causes the jump, the sharp movement up in this with this? What causes that?
Go back a slide to that discontinuous function.
And it's not a normal distribution to shock. It's a The shock can never get you out of the discontinuities.
Just what you get. You,
Yeah.
I had no idea this is the way it would come out.
That's
This
what
is
I'm
not
asking.
rigged at all. It just happened to be.
Yeah.
You can see,
Beautifully
first of all, that you can see that if the shocks are small enough, you never get kicked. And since they're IID,
Yeah.
it's you get the support of the shocks is contained within that area of not responding. So you just don't respond. But then if you start responding, then of course that means you are sensitive to what the shock does, and the shock will then start kicking you up much further more. And that's why that almost discontinuity.
But that's because you started with a lag price of 1. If you had started with a lag price of 1.05, then even small shocks would get you out, and then once you're out, you'd want to come back
What is a
again.
lag of
Yes,
1.05?
you'll go in. If you're outside the zone, you'll immediately go to the middle of the zone, and for the rest of the time, you'll just be in the
Stay
middle
there.
of the zone. So these things are stated correctly, except for the very first observation, which could be start outside. But if it does start outside, you'll go
But then you
inside.
go right back.
You'll go
Yeah.
inside for the rest of the time. So that's why. So this is really an exciting finding, because it's exactly the claim that I made, but way more powerful result than I ever dreamed of. Because I thought that, well, it'll just be kind of proportional to the volatility of
The shock.
of the shock, but instead you get this. So now we have a theory, and the data then that I compiled, which is coming up.
That comes from the shock distribution. If you had a normal shock distribution, then you would at least have a smooth. It would be nonlinear, but it would be smooth.
Well, no, this is smooth. This is a continuous.
Okay, but it would a normal shock distribution would start right away at rising. There would be no period of permanent.
No,
What-
I
what-
think you're
Your shock is smooth, but on a compact domain.
correct.
Normal has an infinite
Unbounded
support.
support.
Correct.
And so then yeah, you're gonna get a lot more kicking around.
Oh,
I
sure.
think the key thing here is the support of the shock.
Right. Yes. Okay. Good point. So that's not going to. You think that's going to knock this? That this is just a special finding? That's
So it would be gloriously nonlinear. It's a good.
Yeah,
point.
it's,
But you would start not sitting at 0 and then boom.
yeah.
But you would start gently going up, and then it would.
yeah.
So-
Oh, sure. Okay.
It's
It'll,
like it's the
yeah.
normal. I mean,
Yeah.
you try normal shock. Just put your computer one line of your code, and we can see what happens with a normal shock.
yeah. Okay.
And then change the variance. The variance should be very small, in which case it'll be a lot like your 0 case, but then that's gonna grow. Yeah,
Okay.
because I think it's the support of the shock relative to this inaction region.
Yes. Okay. That's actually commented in the paper, but not drawing that conclusion.
And the uniform is a very sharp kind of
Yes.
distribution
Yes.
with a very definite sharp relationship to the interval,
And tightly parameterized.
the region of inaction. So you're going to get your results sound very intuitive given that combination.
Okay. All right. So I guess that'll be high in the agenda of
Yeah,
further exploration.
yeah,
Yeah, because this point that it's where the support of the shock lies entirely within the zone of inaction that you get this discontinuous practically. It's not quite. It's actually not discontinuous, but it sure looks like it is. Okay, well that's helpful. So this calculation was based on 300 values of delta. So this is Ken was talking about modeling it as a discrete Markov process, I think. In this case, it would be 300
or
300
continuous.
states. Or
There's an
whatever-
analog for
whatever you want.
continuous ones too, right?
So in other words, I took 300 million data It takes about 5 seconds on my laptop to do all these calculations. It's incredible. But that reflects what a simple math it is. Okay, so that's the analytical finding is this. Okay, so now the question is, well, how much? All right, so we've talked about the key finding. It's this. Okay, so robustness will focus on removing the sharp edge of the uniform distribution and giving it a curved shoulder, and that'll smooth out some of this, but ideally preserve most of it. So an explosion can occur if most terms most of the time are to the left, but then every once in a while there's a shock that takes them over to the right. Then that's going to generate an economy which has sticky prices most of the time, but when things get really rough, firms are free to choose a better price, and will do so presumably.
Why do you say when things get rough?
Higher volatility of cost, the higher value of the whatever measure of delta.
I was at a Fed macro conference last Friday, and one thing they talked about was the monetary injection that we had. And so, when you have an enormous monetary injection, that's just a one-time monetary injection, then yeah, we know price levels go up.
Oh no, that's not right. No, that's
What do you mean?
way off base. That completely neglects the fact that the Fed pays interest on reserves, so that shock disappears in a modern. That's absolutely wrong.
Okay, I'm thinking back, of course, when I was in graduate school before they started paying interest.
Yes. Okay. Well, it's a completely different world today.
Tim is right, because it was a fiscal injection. It was not an open market purchase. It was a gift.
No, it's just paying for one kind of. Well, anyway, I think this is.
Well, Governor Waller talked about this being like a monetary injection.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that just displays that. Remarkable how few economists are thinking seriously about the fact that we pay market interest on reserves, but that's what we do.
Market interest?
Market interest, yes.
Sometimes
Yes,
more.
Yes, right. Yes, market interest.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a completely different world, and it's just I'm staggered.
Okay.
I'm not sure that there's anyone on the board of governors in particular who can really recite how modern monetary economics works. Michael Woodford,
yes,
does know,
okay.
Has learned this exactly right. You got to read Woodford. Okay. Anyway, how are we doing?
You got a half hour.
Oh, that's fine. Okay.
One question, Bob, can I ask about
Sure.
on the nerdy side? But given that you have a one parameter family, it's not a pure volatility compared to statics you're doing, because you're changing both moments,
Changing what?
both with the first and the second moments of the cost distribution and
No, the cost
the
distribution
price.
has first moment one,
Mhm.
non-stochastic.
But it's delta. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Because it's 1 plus is centered around 1.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
That was.
I presume at some point we're going to do like a network where your price is my cost and the whole system gets more volatile.
Well, okay. If this catches on, somebody might do that.
Okay.
I doubt that it would be me.
Well, it should be,
But
right?
It should be, of course. Sure. But
Because
it's a question of
if I buy from you, then as long as you don't change your price, I don't have a cost shock, and so we can double the volatility here as soon as you start changing prices and they become my cost shocks.
Yeah. And there's been some work, recent modeling of that phenomenon, but
Now,
I don't think it's.
now in the mid '90s, John and I had a student, Alejandro Castaneda, I think is his name, where he solved out this game for a duopoly. Two firms set their prices, but there's a cost of adjusting the price. I have no idea what the results were. I remember liking it at the time. I don't have a read a copy of his thesis in my library. But no, that was all solved out as a duopoly problem. That's not a network because they're horizontal relations.
Yeah, well, that would be an alternative environment.
Yeah. And the new Keynesian models are horizontal imperfect competition.
Let's go to the second proposition.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's, now the question is there much volatility to the cost shocks? And the short answer is there's an incredible amount of volatility. So let me go through that. So it doesn't, a lot of modifications that reduce some of the amplification that we just talked about will still bite into just a huge amount of measured volatility. Okay, so this is the measurement approach that I've taken so far is at the detailed, semi-detailed 71 industries for which we have quarterly data on input costs. And on input costs, that's what it is. We also, in addition, have data on total factor productivity. So I'll talk about both of those, and they look quite similar. Okay, so let's see, we can expand the universe a little bit. P was equal to 2 times C, sorry, mu times C divided by, oh, okay, sorry. Anyway, the parameters mu and A were taken to be 1 in the model, but it's clear that fluctuations in mu and A would have similar effects because the pricing in the constant elasticity specification that has just this simple multiplicative form. But even though I've done a lot of work on mu, I don't trust it, and other people don't. Certainly not at the fluctuation level. It's hard enough to get the level of mu, which is an interesting statistic, but it's very hard to find its volatility. So I'm going to put that aside. But we're going to look at the volatility of cost C and productivity, total factor productivity A, in an extended version of the model we just talked about. Yeah. Okay. So notice that we don't. There's not a variable called demand. I mean, this is a model. Takes the model seriously, so it doesn't have demand. There's no object called demand in it. The 3 things that can affect price are the 3 mu, C, and A. And interestingly, I have done actually quite a bit of work in the same body data, which also enables me to look at volatility of price, and it's quite low, much lower than any of the 3 things that make it up.
If you think of demand as a shift in the demand curve, I see it. But if you think of demand as a change in the elasticity of the demand curve, then
sure. Oh, absolutely. Yes. The elasticity of the elasticity. Second order elasticity.
So to Ken's point, and this assumes that you can instantly expand supply as much as you want. No fixed factors.
Sure. Yeah. We're pretty familiar with this kind of environment. So
you are.
It has pluses and minuses. Everything is fixable. I think the two pieces that we're talking about here are going to survive. A more determined attack. Okay, so there's a BEA data from a relatively new source that goes back to 2005, but for this purpose, that includes the 2 big events that we're interested in. So that's satisfactory. And the statistic here is the cross-sectional standard deviation of the growth ratio. So that's a measure of the volatility.
So these are relative prices. I mean, demand has to matter at some point. We all decide we're going to measure prices in cents, not in dollars. And you would say, well, that's the cost. The nominal cost goes up. So, but if everybody's nominal cost is somebody else's nominal price, then we just bootstrap the whole thing somehow.
Yeah, you know, I I sat down and thought that all the way through. Now I'll get back to you on that.
Nominal or input prices here? So the nominal growth rate of input prices?
Yeah, if you change that, it just changes a constant. So it wouldn't matter to the. Anyway.
What is the nominal
Depends
price
how
that's
things are
sticky?
deflated. I mean,
Well, I think you want, this is a paper about inflation, and you want to think about the nominal prices being
Yeah.
sticky.
that's my thinking as well.
And that's why I'm still, inflation does have something to do with demand somewhere, and we all kind of get out of whack.
Yeah, which also raises another issue about why it makes sense to think of a unchanging interval over which these cost shocks are rising. Things are nominal here. The price level's rising, so that interval seems hard. You assume there's no trend in that, but that seems to set aside the issue here.
Okay. Well, first of all, this issue doesn't arise with TFP, which does have.
It's more plausible that TFP is trendless.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
for sure.
I'll get the same results for TFP, so
Yeah.
I can at least fall back.
But
on
even
that.
there, at the industry level, that seems unlikely, and the firm level seems even more unlikely. That there be trendless TFP.
Okay, I came up with a really good answer to this question when I asked myself a few weeks ago, and I'll get back to you because I've thought about that.
Is it? I know you ultimately went to the computer on this. Is it that hard to just take dispense with the 100% discounting assumption, allow for some trends or some more plausible forcing process, and instead of having your computer do it in 5 seconds, maybe it does it in 5 hours, but generate the same picture you're interested in. And then you just sets aside a lot of these concerns that keep coming up. That seems like a feasible approach.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
It is.
I'm sure King can tell you the most efficient way to solve all these things, but it seems like you're overly tying your hands here. So you can solve this in 5 seconds instead of 5 hours.
No, that wasn't.
But no, maybe that's the impression I'm getting.
First of all, I'm not.
Bob has made a cute, nice little point, which can't be pushed too far.
Okay, but if we want to know how far it can be pushed.
Yeah, and then that requires more computing. Yes. Now, I see the BEA intermediate input, and I'm thinking of John's comment. What about the network? Because these intermediate, some firms are selling their output to be other people's intermediate goods. There's like an input-output matrix. Yeah. I don't know if that's in the data. That's in the BEA.
What you shows the quarterly numbers.
Yeah, that would be nice to incorporate.
Yeah. So it's pretty remarkable. Notice that the financial crisis actually generates even more room than the pandemic. There's also two places, one in 2005 and the other in about 2015, where there was meaningful changes without being associated with any particular. But the two big spikes were two very identifiable crises. Yeah. And it's in the it's something like a factor of 5. I mean, it's huge.
Bob, my cost is somebody else's price. So productivity, I understand, is an exogenous thing to the economy, but cost is someone else's price. So it's not like exogenously costs change.
Well, but that's what. So the analysis that I presented earlier depends on a price called C, which is someone else's. Well, I'm not
right.
sure. So
So if you say prices got more flexible because costs changed more, that's kind of tautological because costs change more because prices got more flexible.
Okay, I don't think that that's anything different from. There was no claim.
No.
There's no one's. This is not the result of running a regression where causation is an issue.
If you see high cross-industry standard deviation of intermediate costs, you also should see more of this flexibility of prices at the same time.
Kind of by definition, because the costs wouldn't be cheap.
You're just
Costs are somebody else's price.
You'll have more of these. You have more of these adjustments.
I mean, think of this as comparing two worlds. One subject to some force, which has caused more dispersion in prices and therefore in costs. It's just a question of, do the endogenous variables follow the description that I've offered or not? It seems to me that I was really surprised. Both aspects of this gave much more convincing results than I ever dreamt of getting when I started this project. Most of us struggle to get a t statistic more than 2. If you're testing the hypothesis that one of these numbers hasn't changed, you get a t statistic way better than 2. But maybe I haven't understood.
Just to get the story right, let's say it's 2008, Lehman has failed. You're saying there's a bunch of something's happened which changes costs, and then prices change in reaction to that.
Yeah.
And the thing that changes costs is, do you have in mind that there are demand shifts and therefore price changes? And going to John's question, those are the sources of the cost shifts? Or there's something about, factor productivity that's shifted because it's a crisis?
I'm just looking at data and looking for a relationship among endogenous variables. So it seems to me that it could be any one of many things, but they all converge. They all would have the same implication.
Yeah. It's consistent that if input costs change, then output costs will shift as well by your model. But then you just get wrapped up in this endogeneity. How much of the price, the cross-sectional price volatility that we're seeing is reaction to some fundamental underlying cost shifters, as opposed to reaction to other people that are changing their prices, and therefore a multiplier sort of effect.
I don't see. I see what you're saying, and if I were running a regression or something like that, but I'm just looking at relations among endogenous variables and seeing a particular setup.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah, okay.
It's all consistent.
That's a question. Following a little bit up on Darrell. So I've just spent a week talking to people from Princeton and NYU of a different persuasion. They would tell you that we have a framework, a working framework for monetary policy that is the so-called Hank model, where the only issue is that the model is capable of producing counter-cyclical markups, but it has issues producing cyclical profits. And so I take their effort as being, you may or may not like it, but an effort that is overlooking a lot of the market microstructure determinants of output and input price rigidities. Shall I think about, I'm very attuned to input market wage rigidities, labor markets. Shall I be thinking about your effort as one of opening the black box of the output market ones? How does that make sense what I'm asking? You think of yourself as talking about this broad debate. We know that price rigidity are paramount.
What's the broad debate?
Now, they've been in Hank models that are supposed to be used for monetary policy, but I have counterfactual implications about first-order cyclical behavior of very relevant variables like markups and profits. But if you look at how these
So
models,
you're saying,
yeah.
you're asking, does this approach blow Hank out of the water?
I'm thinking that if you open up the black box of those models, the way that output and input market prices are determined is extremely primitive, if not counterfactual. And so I'm thinking about this effort of yours as going over the determinants of price rigidities in output markets, which are critical ingredients in these mega frameworks. Is that the way you're thinking about this exercise?
Not sure. I think, well, can we talk about it later?
For instance, they have this Calvo-Rauschenberg structure where monetary policy doesn't have really a feedback impact on how often you want to adjust prices. In a world in which you do that endogenously, of course, you may want to do it differently because the effective price cost that you pay to adjust is different, a different level of the overall interest rates. I'm just trying to think whether you're thinking about this as a model, an optimistic competitive model of the Apple market for CEOs. It could be an ingredient into a grand framework for monetary policy that is plausible at this.
There's a grand
this
thing.
level.
Yes. Okay. Now you're getting into territory I recognize. Do I have a grand, a new macro? Answer: yes. But I have to be cautious, and I would lose my audience if I revealed everything that's in my brain. Because
we can take
there's
it.
too many things that I would look like Roger Farmer.
So can we say there is a time varying Calvo parameter, and you are trying to provide some micro foundations why that Calvo parameter would be time varying in times of crisis, but then we don't know exactly how it happens. But this where are you going?
Yeah. So
That's what I'm saying.
Calvo loses his grip on prices when the pot has been stirred a lot and volatility is showing. That's kind of a universal proposition, and so it can be lifted out of all the other ideas that I have that aren't catching on, and promote that as an idea that may catch on.
And also more than that, because people will tell you, why bother with Calvo do Rauschenberg computational people, because the nonlinearities are very small, even if you have an entire distribution of prices to keep track of. You showed us linearities that are very important. So even those kind of statements
I take
no
it.
longer
I
true.
take this to mean that Calvo was from the very. I never liked Calvo because I knew SS.
Sure.
And
Right.
it's like, why do we have this fixed interval of time between price changes? It's I always thought wrong because I knew SS. And so basically what you're showing is an example of why
Exactly.
SS is much better than
Either approximation.
rigidity of Calvo.
Yes. One thing I agree with is that this is
Reset pricing, you lose the Phillips curve. Is that right?
Well, if that's your agenda to save the Phillips curve, my agenda
Many have tried.
is to write down models that have coherent micro foundations as a SS.
As a empirical exercise in the history of economic thought, I thought the answer was reset pricing. There's no Phillips curve, so we pretend that there's no reset pricing.
So Bob, you want to talk about any
But with the
policy
lags,
stuff?
it's reset. It's the lags that give you Phillips.
Minutes or so,
Yeah.
but just
Well,
monetary policy, whatever, any policy
Yeah.
issues.
Well, let me finish. First of all, I've only given half of this. So this is the quarterly cost data. TFP data is annual, which I think is okay. Okay, so productivity there's much bigger lag. So let me just show you the picture for. So it looks like we only have productivity numbers for the full year of 2020, and you can see that it's headed up. It's probably going to go up some more. The numbers will come out next month, so stand by for that. But it seems clear that we're seeing something comparable in magnitude in productivity, and that helps deal with the question we were talking about before, because there is a natural metric of productivity. Okay, so So I think that's, so the rest of what's in the paper deals with. Okay, so it's very important to understand that these findings of volatility are not findings about a driving force of inflation. This isn't some new source of inflation that you haven't looked at before. It's something that should affect the monetary policy in particular. It should make monetary policy have more effect on prices and less effect on output. So it would reduce the and right now the Fed likes this idea. That's how I earned my footnote at the conference last Friday, because the harmful effects on unemployment and output that would normally be expected for disinflation would be much less in the world that I've described, because we're still in an area where lots of firms are outside their zones of inaction. We're still in a relatively high volatility mode, and that makes the Phillips curve. If you translate it into Phillips curve, it basically works on the slope of the Phillips curve. Makes Phillips curve steeper. Makes stepping on the monetary brake, which we have been doing, as an effective way to stop inflation and not pay such a high price in lost output.
I don't, in your model, I don't see a Phillips curve at all. How does raising interest rates have anything to do with inflation if this is how prices are set?
Oh, well, okay, so let's imagine one of the next steps is to recognize the heterogeneity in where firms are planted relative to their zones of inaction. So some firms are very much in the interior, and they're not going to be affected very much at all. So they'll still contribute to the.
But you said they don't react to demand. So there's no Phillips curve in this thing. So if I raise interest rates and that affects aggregate demand, that doesn't change anybody's prices in this.
Oh no! What you're way off base.
Am I? I mean,
no.
Is there a model where
this is a model in which there is non-neutrality of a Phillips curve character for some firms, namely the firms that are planted well within their zones of inaction. When policy pushes all those firms somewhat, it's going to get a Phillips curve effect. So that's how this fits into.
Is that written down?
Oh, no.
Steven's question.
Okay.
I want to raise a different issue. You focus on volatility, but we know in standard SS models that uncertainty widens the zone of inaction. And those same shocks the same episodes you've been showing us with lots of volatility were also periods of unusual uncertainty by forward-looking measures. And that's a countervailing force to the one you've been emphasizing.
Okay, well.
So so you actually, depending on which force is stronger, you could actually go either way. So think about the argument you just made with respect to the Fed. If zones of inaction on price setting are getting wider, then quantity responses would be bigger. And that cuts, I'm not saying that's the right view, but it is also comes out of this class of models.
Okay, well.
And it seemed to me you need to wrestle with that and argue, if you want to, that the volatility effect you're stressing is bigger than the uncertainty effect.
Okay, you'll have to. We should talk some more, and you should talk me into this.
Okay.
Okay, so.
But going back to John's question, so monetary policy is going to affect C.
C, as has been pointed out quite a few times in this discussion, is another word for a lot of prices. We have to get into the question of how it is that monetary policy and the way it's currently implemented, how it has effects.
Yeah.
Well, you have a few.
Raise interest. Yeah, as you said, they're paying full interest on reserves. We raise the interest on reserves. Why does anybody in this model care about that?
Because the way the Fed and the like-minded banks, which is almost all advanced economy banks, operate is by setting two interest rates.
Yeah.
And confining all short-term interest rates in the whole economy to that range which is like 50 basis points.
Right.
So
why?
The central bank directly controls economic activity by changing short-run interest rates.
In this model, I don't see that anybody cares about the level of nominal short-term interest rates. And if you just said demand has no effect on prices. So
okay. Well, okay, that gets us back to this.
This is a serious question because I'm now
so
looking for any such model, and it's hard to find models where this actually happens.
Well, you have some slides on monetary policy.
Yeah.
You want to finish with your slides on M's? Or not?
Well, I don't know. I feel like there's such hostility to.
It's not
No,
hostility.
no,
it's
it's
an honest question.
Hostility to me.
Not hostility.
A lot of
Sorry,
love.
I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it was personal. I mean,
I just want to see the rest of the model where raising an interest rate has any effect on anything in this model.
okay, well, this is just completely standard New Keynesian doctrine, which I think you're just expressing.
Well, no, because you made fun of the New Keynesian Phillips curve, which is a central part of New Keynesian doctrine. So
okay, but it involves things like the intertemporal substitution and consumption, stuff like that, right?
okay, so that would lower demand, and you just told us
stuff.
demand doesn't affect prices in this model.
You know, the guy who's worked on models that seem useful here is Villaverde.
Yes.
So he's got New Keynesian models with stochastic volatility. He talks about how that affects the transmission from monetary policy shocks to real and nominal variables. That seems like
He was the very first person after this paper appeared to get in touch with me as a fellow traveler after this paper came out on the.
So why can't you build on his models? Or
Of course you can.
Or just take his models and run your thought experiments.
Okay, but I was trying to lever, the what I think is widely accepted in the macro community, even if if there's some aspects that you don't buy into, but intertemporal substitution in consumption and interest sensitivity of investment. That's the object that occupies the slot in the New Keynesian model that you don't seem to recognize.
And then that goes through a Phillips curve to affect prices, but this model doesn't have a Phillips curve. So
Yes, it does.
So may I ask?
You want to conclude?
John is telling us to.
Okay. The rest of the slides would take too long.
Another talk. Thank you.
Okay.